welcome to another episode of Digitalk Architects. We are here with Joel Hardroff from, well, actually, he's going to explain what he's from, but it's an interesting concept. So I'll let you, Joel, do the full intro of what you do. You're in the startup business, but it's pretty specific. So please go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota right now, and I've been a social entrepreneur for many years. In the 80s, I built a solar heating products company in New Mexico, and I worked in the barter industry where I learned there's two kinds of barter, business to business and individual to individual. And I figured out a way that businesses and individuals could barter. And that's because people barter their excess capacity. And we'll get into why that's an important feature of our work and of the new economy we envision. And then, just to practice my creativity, I built a solar adobe house in New Mexico, half on barter and half out of recycled building materials. So that was a fun project. I'll just say for people who think holistically, at 27, I had a workaholic near nervous breakdown. And luckily, a friend pushed a book on transcendental meditation into my hands. And so there became a spiritual element to my journey. And I began doing body work, breath work, the Landmark Forum, Course in Miracles, men's warrior training, and then a great deal of entrepreneurial work, the solar industry, the barter industry, and then the inventing of a next currency. And I'll say one more piece by way of introduction. Every economic era is powered by a next generation of currency made possible by new technologies. So the agricultural era that lasted 3,000 to 5,000 years was based on barter and gold coins or metal coins, and that was all made possible by smelting. The industrial era, which lasted 300 to 500 years, was powered by a new money, paper currency, and checks. And if you think someone would have taken you seriously offering a piece of paper instead of a cow or the gold, it took a while for paper to catch on as a form of money. And then the whole high-tech era that we're living in right now, credit cards, e-commerce, digital money, that's all been made possible by computers and the internet. And we're saying there's a long ways to go to create the kind of world that's possible with all of our technology. We call it continuous economic improvement. This will be the last thing before we go to your questions. So the things that produce wealth only get better every day. Technology only gets better. Yeah. Human skill, knowledge, and creativity only improve. Global economic infrastructure only improves. Our ability to use free and abundant renewable resource only improves. So if the things that produce wealth only improve, why don't we have an ever higher quality of life for everyone, ever shorter working hours for everyone, ever less damage to the environment upon which all life depends? So there's something off about money economics and commerce. And so then we get into blame the left, blame the right, blame the rich, blame the poor, and blame the foreigners. And blame gets us nowhere. And so our model has been designed to raise everyone up together and to get us past blame. So talking to you all from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota.
All right, Joel, let's jump into some of the things that you and I have had the pleasure of talking about before. Monetizing, I know you know, in this social stuff and how to make the world better, you've talked about monetizing exit capacity in a ways that benefit communities and businesses. And, we're here mostly for small, medium-sized businesses. What does that actually look like in your vision for in today's world, right?
Yeah.
And Yeah, no, go ahead.
So first, I want people to understand just how much excess capacity there is. And then I'm going to talk about traditional ways it's been monetized and why that hasn't been working. And then I'll talk about what we can do that's different. So if any business is doing well in the economy, 5, 10, 20 competitors jump in, copy them, and pretty soon everybody's not doing well, right? And so
yes, true.
Business, there's not a lot of discussion in economics of underutilized business capacity. Why? Because unfortunately, it's considered operator error. A company either overproduced or they undermarketed, but that's not the source of excess capacity. It's this relentless competition. If 5 airlines are working, we found 25. If 10 restaurants are doing well in a community, pretty soon we not only have many, many restaurants, but we have bars serving food, we have employee cafeterias, we have trucks outside. It just goes on and on. Grocery stores, are now offering a salad bar. Sometimes they have a coffee shop and a restaurant inside. It's just insane. And of course, when all you do is add competition, that isn't just a huge win, because pretty soon businesses start to fail, or there's downward pressure on market share, prices, profits, and wages. So traditional growth isn't automatically a solution to our economic problems. And I'll say it just one more way. It all started with the private sector, but we had plenty of problems, right? Never solved poverty, hasn't solved healthcare to this day. So we added the public sector. The private and the public sector haven't solved our social, economic, and environmental problems, especially on a global scale. So we added the nonprofit sector, and that became a giant economic sector. And people give charity and do philanthropy and do volunteerism all day long. So then we've always had the cooperative sector, and there's huge cooperatives and neighborhood cooperatives. And then more recently, based on high tech, we've got the sharing economy, which I'll talk about next, and we've got social impact investing. So with all that growth and all that good intention, why is there still poverty? Well, you're back to blaming. Some are blaming the rich. But I'll tell you why that's kind of stupid. There isn't a rich family alive on the planet that can eat enough food to cause one family to go hungry, to live in a big enough house to cause anybody to be homeless, consume enough education or health care for anybody to go without. It's the perfect example that people confuse money, which is just a number in a computer today, with wealth. What do we mean by wealth as excess capacity? Well, number one, food's an abundant renewable resource. Global agribusiness wants more customers. Restaurants distribute food. Cafeterias at schools distribute food. Grocery stores distribute food. How can we have food as an abundant renewable resource and people going hungry in our country and around the world? I should say our countries, because we're the United States of America and you're part of North America. So anyway, this idea and everything digital is infinite. So the origins of modern economics were really in the concept of scarce resources and unlimited wants and needs. Well, food's not a scarce resource. As I said, it's an abundant renewable resource. There's not unlimited wants and needs for food. The consequences of overeating are obesity, poor health, and death. So economics, the underlying economics, has some problems that nobody's been challenging. And the current design of money is competitive. I've got it. You get it, but then I don't have it. And different companies are fighting over money. Communities are fighting over money. Corporations are fighting over money. We've invented a cooperative money. And I'll summarize that quickly, but then I'd like to see what questions you have from what I've covered so far, because I'm just barely sticking a toe in the water. And I'll go back and say each economic era came in on the back of a new money made possible by a new technology, right? And these days we've seen cryptocurrencies, which I'm going to tell, this will upset some crypto fans, but cryptocurrency isn't a currency. There's nothing that you buy with dollars or yen or pesos that then itself is a new currency. So what cryptocurrency is a poker chip. You buy a bunch hoping that the value goes up and that you get rich, but value can just as easily go down and you can lose money. Crypto people hate when I say that, but the other way of looking at cryptocurrency is like a movie ticket. You buy a movie ticket for cash, right? You don't go down to the ticket taker and say, "Do you accept my new currency?" You'd look like an idiot. But when you buy something with cash and then you call it a currency, all you're doing is putting a new face on the cash. The one other thing, the revelation of all the excess capacity is in all the ways we try to market it. So businesses try to sell it for all the cash they can. Then businesses put it on sale. So that's cash, but less cash. Then businesses use it as an employee benefit. You work at the airlines for your discount flights. Would you get free or discount flights if they didn't have excess capacity? No way. You work at the university, free or discount tuition. You work at a restaurant, free or discount food. You work at a gym, free or discount membership. So everybody uses their excess capacity as an employee benefit. Then you barter it. A restaurant trades meals for menus to a print shop. and I was in this industry. So, there's a massive barter economy, business to business. Hotels trade empty rooms, airlines trade empty seats, the media trades in the trillions. None of them buys a fleet of cars because auto executives need airline flights, motel stays, and advertising. So these are all uses of excess capacity. Now, on top of employee benefits, putting it on sale, bartering it, giving it as a donation to the community, loyalty rewards is one more way of trying to market excess capacity, but it's really just a discount. Frequent flyer miles, buy 5 flights, get 1 free.
Right.
Restaurant points, spend this much
Right.
and get these points. Coffee, there's plenty of extra coffee, so buy 10 cups, get another punch card, or now it's all electronic for free. So we have all these ways of using excess capacity, but look around. College desks are empty more than they're full. Grocery store aisles full of groceries are empty of customers more than they're full. Airlines park their big flights and fill up their smaller planes, or they limit the number of planes and leave a lot of them parked in the hangar. Gyms have a few busy hours and then lots of dead hours. So everywhere you look, there's plenty of excess capacity, but people can't access it without money. And we make excuses why people don't have the money, but money was invented, match buyers and sellers. And so it's only doing it to a certain extent. So our money, the next generation of currency, we call a ledger currency. It's not an exchange token. Ledgers measure. So when ledgers measure the available wealth and match it to the unmet need, that's a completely different phenomenon than anything you see out there today. I'll eventually explain dual currency, which is enough traditional money in the deal to still work for merchants and enough new money in the deal to start spreading more purchasing power. But think about ledgers. The idea came from Walden 2 by B.F. Skinner, where their money was called labor credits and they represented hours. You can never run out of hours, and you can never run out of entries in a ledger. Ledgers don't crash. Ledgers don't have inflation and recession. You can't lend a ledger entry for interest or invest a ledger entry for dividends. You can't compete over ledger entries. And so it's a complete new paradigm where money's the servant, money's not the master. And so now let me see what's come up for you so far, and then I'll go into dual currency commerce, which is the bridge between the dollar or the fiat currency economy and a new economy of what we call sustainable prosperity. We don't need any more growth. We need the efficient use of all the growth we've already done. So I know that was quite an introduction, right? A little bit more than my name. And the company name we're using right now is Universal Reward Solutions, but we're working on some new brands because we're building the economic internet, not the traditional internet, but the internet's a huge piece of the puzzle. All right, back to you.
What is it? The economics of internet?
The economic internet. So we've got the regular competitive internet.
Mm-hmm.
And we're introducing a cooperative internet. Now, there's many positive features about the internet, which is why we're building right on top of the internet. Number one, the internet lives in the commons. It's not owned by anybody. Right. It doesn't need a management team. Why not? Because it operates by protocol. Protocol is a set of rules that run a system. Visa operates by protocol. It's called the interchange. And if you don't follow the protocol, you can't use the tool. Same with the internet. If you don't follow the protocol, you can't get on the internet. But consider this in terms of the problems we can solve. The minute you get on the internet, it has what we call mass customization. What's that? It means you can get on and do charity, e-commerce, or pornography. You can be for or against guns, for or against abortions, for or against immigration. So it's a giant commons owned by nobody and not run by politics or politicians, but run by freedom of choice. So all those who want to do e-commerce, do e-commerce. All those who want to be hunters and share their guns, do that. Those who want to be vegans and share their recipes, do that. Our ledger economic system stands on the shoulders of all the things that the economy is doing right, but it balances competition and cooperation in a completely new way. So we're not constantly building up companies just to fail. The consequences of every advance in technology, infrastructure, human capabilities, and our ability to use free and abundant renewable resources, I'll say again, is what we call continuous economic improvement, ever higher quality of life for everyone. Not by, I'm going to say why this is beyond left versus right in 1 second. Higher quality of life for everyone, shorter working hours for everyone. You know, historically, they've always asked the question, why isn't technology shortening the work week? Well, it's because it's speeding up the pace at which people chase money, but it's not distributing new purchasing power to everybody. So, you know, people
Yes.
are laid off as often as they're getting raises. And then ever higher quality of life, ever shorter working hours, ever less damage to the environment. So efficiency begins to replace growth as the engine of economics, and it raises everybody up together. So I forgot what I said I was going to say next after I explained continuous economic improvement. Okay, I can say one more thing about excess capacity, and again, it'll explain why we don't always constantly rise together. And I already said you can't blame the rich. They're not eating all the food or consuming all the education or healthcare or any of that. And blaming the poor is just blaming the people who worked every day to make a living and raise the world up. So the sharing economy demonstrated what we call the monetization of excess capacity. So there were these empty rooms and homes, and there were these idle cars and drivers. And suddenly along comes the sharing economy and says, well, with the technology of today, we can alert somebody that there's a room here. It used to be called couch surfing, right? Carolina,
Yeah.
do you remember that term? The radical youth would look for a place to stay. It'd just be free normally, but somebody saw the opportunity. So two giant industries were built out of the tiniest amount of excess capacity, an empty room in someone's home or an idle car and driver. Imagine if we monetize the excess capacity of all the empty seats in universities, not to mention the empty cafeterias and the empty dormitories. Universities are really, in many cases, on the decline, or all the off hours at fitness clubs and things like that, all the excess capacity of grocery stores. But what happens when the monetization of excess capacity takes place through win-lose competition over money? Well, what happens is you suddenly get winners and losers, right? So who took the hit from the rise of Airbnb? Hotels, motels, and their employees. We didn't just raise everybody up with all that new wealth. Somebody had to take the hit. And who took the hit
Right.
from the rise of Uber and Lyft? Cab drivers, limo
Cubs.
drivers, and their companies. We say that is ridiculous. That's the problem of win-lose competition over old-fashioned scarce money. How do we know money's scarce? Can you think of anything that you would pay 10% interest on or 5% interest on if it wasn't scarce? Nobody pays interest for water, except when suddenly it's scarce. And so this idea that money's scarce, even though today it's just a number in a computer, it's really holding back the distribution of goods and services where they're needed. And the reason we say conservatives and liberals and radicals can all get together around this, because for conservatives, it's business-led, market-based, and profit-driven. It requires no higher taxes, no deeper debt, no redistribution of wealth schemes. So it's a business innovation. Well, if it's all that for conservatives, what's left for liberals, radicals, and greens? Well, number one, it's immediate. People are sick and tired of being told the system works, but it's just trickle down. It isn't, everybody's not rising together. And it's very hard on the small businesses. We know that because they haven't got the budget of the big businesses. But when there's
True.
plenty of purchasing power in communities, they have a fighting chance. But also, we'll get to this a little bit later. Some people are only in small businesses for survival. They didn't see what they liked either in a big business or as a solopreneur, so they started a small business. It's not an easy life. It's not a guarantee of success. Small businesses have it hard. And so in a world of abundance, people will have a lot more opportunities to do well and to choose because there's a lot more purchasing power. And they may not choose small businesses. They may choose shorter hours, because small businesses are working long hours. All right, longer discussion of what the future holds. So Let's
Well, you
see,
know
where
what?
was I?
On that note, many of our listeners, which it's small, medium-sized businesses, are struggling to stand out in what's otherwise a pretty saturated market. You mentioned it earlier. You propose the cooperation, not just competition, right? What is a cooperative? Let's call it marketing, like collaboration or shared growth, which you were just talking about strategy looks like in practice, right? So we're talking about the concept of, kind of distributing equally, making more people successful instead of the
Equitably,
win lose. Yeah, the win lose situation. But the reality is that that's not the case right now. So what's the strategy so that becomes sort of a reality?
This is a really good question because I'm going to go a few different places with this. I developed a slogan, ghost towns into eco villages. Now, I don't think the world's thinking about eco villages. It looks like science fiction, right? But the smaller towns are dying across the world, and the bigger cities are not a high quality of life, and the campuses are over competitive and empty much of the time. So those are three areas: rural, smaller towns, inner cities, and campuses where there's a lot of infrastructure, but not a high quality of life. And in the rural area, the infrastructure could be there next week. One of our technology partners has infrastructure designed for what we call information economy cities of the future. A lot of people are sick and tired of the quality of life in the cities. They want nature. They want, whether it's to go hunting or to just avoid the pollution of the cities. But how do you make a living there? And how do you keep, the youth are fleeing to the cities for the culture, and now they think you're what's that? Let's see, not the Puritans, the folk that live, they drive buggies and horses. They're still
Oh yeah.
living that lifestyle. I just can't remember the name of it.
Oh, the name? Well,
The Amish.
the Amish. Yeah, you call them Amish. We call them Mennonites, actually.
Well,
Well, that's what they
those
call
are
them here. Yeah, they're the same.
those are
They're
different
sort of
kinds.
the
Now,
same. Yeah.
we don't expect people to go back to the lifestyle of the horse and buggy, but that doesn't mean they have to live in the crowded, smelly lifestyle of the city either. So we've invented something very interesting. It was called for decades ago by Ross Perot when he ran for president. He called it computer democracy, but it didn't catch on, or electronic town hall meetings. Well, millions and millions of votes can now be taken in 5 minutes from the neighborhood level to the global level, but people don't understand because they watch the voting during America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent, India's Got Talent, and they can
Every
collect
country has
millions of
got
votes.
talent.
Exactly. They can collect millions of votes in 5 minutes, right? So we could vote
It's true.
on the neighborhood level. Do you want another coffee shop or do you want another childcare center? We can vote on the global level. Do we need to keep up these crazy wars, or would we like to find ways of making peace and sharing resources? All the resources that go into the military are about destroying the earth. And one thing we got from the Bible was beating swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Tanks can be tractors. We can build up agriculture across the globe overnight. In fact, one of the models that some of us like is that the United States led 28 countries in the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II, and in a mere 4 years, we had rebuilt Europe and Japan. And so we've got so much money going into destroying the planet, and we could have a high quality of life across the board as long as it isn't about redistribution of wealth, take it away from the rich. No, we don't have to threaten anybody, but there are so many people working long hours and not seeing their children, and that's deteriorating the quality of life of families. And there's a little kids book, the Berenstein Bears, No More Television, and they take their kids out to look at the stars at night, or what would we do with shorter hours? People think everybody's in love with work because that's where they find themselves. Baloney. People would like a little more family time, community time, spiritual growth time, nature time. I know a lot of people who'd like to spend more time in sports, either actively in sports or watching sports. Well, when you're working longer and longer hours, it's taking time away from other things you would enjoy. If we let technology do the work, and I'll give you one more example, So the people in the small and medium-sized businesses are doing it again, many times to flee the corporate life, but they it's not luxurious. It's not what they thought. Their bookstore is not able to offer the number of books that people find on Amazon or Barnes and Noble
True.
or any of that. And so it is truly hard to compete. But when people have more choices because the world's an abundant place and not a scarce place, people begin to carve out lifestyles. A lot of people liked becoming an Airbnb host or a Uber or Lyft driver, but they're working long, hard hours because that's gotten really competitive. So if people understood that continuous economic improvement leverages technology, leverages human capabilities, and everybody could have ever higher quality of life, ever shorter working hour, ever less damage to the environment. And of course, it's hard to explain all this in an hour, right? But happy to continue the conversation with who's ever interested. They can get my contact information from you at the end, or Joel Hodroff, JoelHodroff. Look me up on LinkedIn. But do you see that the systems always change? We don't live under gold coins or paper currency and checks. And electronic banking should be providing an infinitely higher quality of life, but it's just speeding up the pace at which people compete over money.
Yeah, it's 100% true. Let's switch it up a little bit in here and let's talk a little bit about, because I know you're also invested in AI and automations and technology. And of course that is the buzzword in what's like popular today. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on um AI and automation in businesses, especially for small, medium-sized businesses. We know enterprises are already doing a bunch of stuff, but is the small, medium-sized businesses that are still shining away from AI for many reasons, but one, because they don't understand it too well, two, they're not exposed to it as much as some of us are. They are running their businesses, they're not looking at technology the way we do.
Right.
But it is reshaping the way we do business and
It absolutely is.
the way we run marketing, sales, and customer support. I mean, all the things that are coming out, it's definitely reshaping how those things
Right.
are managed, right? Like I know from our point of view, with our marketing services and all the things, automations that we're doing for businesses, there's so much we can do now. But how do you see AI playing a role in advancing your collaboration system, right? And model that we're talking about? And what tools or practices do you see these small, medium sized businesses needing to explore or implement as we progress through this AI boom?
So, first of all, I want to put in the plug for Digital Architects because people should simply call you and you do an inventory with them and what are their challenges, because just like automating factory work with robotics, it's not a different world. It's just a different tool. So all the time that they spend, with the inexpensive traditional advertising models, radio, television, flyers, sponsorships of events, and then they barter, they
Yeah.
give loyalty rewards and things like that. That's all old fashioned competitive. So you can bring them into the 21st century with people saving things and with marketing that reaches broader and broader audiences, but again, that's the traditional side of it. I'm going to talk about the two cutting edge, bring us into the new economy sides of it. First of all, people may not be familiar with the term paradigm shift. But when we went from barter to gold coins, that was a paradigm shift in money. And, the people who didn't believe in coins, give me the cow, give me the eggs, they didn't participate in it. And then we went from gold coins to paper currency. And the people who didn't want the paper, they were the late adopters. There's early adopters, middle adopters, and late adopters. And so we know that over time, everything that the big companies are using becomes cheaper and cheaper, and then the smaller companies start using it. So companies didn't have point of sale and they couldn't accept Visa or MasterCard or American Express and Discover. But of course, now any company can invest a small amount in point of sale technology and be there right away. So same with using the internet. You know, they're early adopters and then late adopters. And some small businesses are very smart. I'm working with a woman. You should contact me about this. She's building a socially responsible Amazon. So if you want your products and services to be seen on a different site, it's called CauseCart, CAUSE hyphen CART. So look up CauseCart, reach out to her, and that's very cutting edge. And smaller businesses will be seen and have an advantage. But I want to say that paradigm shifts, the big changes are systemic. So small companies couldn't have built the internet, but they can now take advantage of e-commerce, right? So,
Right.
and small companies couldn't have had electronic payroll first, but the big companies built electronic payroll, built healthcare benefits and things like that. And so what we're going to do is spread the purchasing power that the adoption by smaller companies can happen right away because they'll have more funding, because our funding is across the board and from the bottom up. Our funding isn't what you fight for in the market. So that's profound. And so paradigm shifts can be for everybody. And I'll tell you, these smaller businesses want a higher quality of life. And so our proposition of more purchasing power, shorter working hours, and less damage to the environment is a good fit for them. But another good example of paradigm shifts, when the first online encyclopedia was under construction, one of the most powerful companies in the world was building it. It was Microsoft, Encarta, and they had all the money,
Yes, I
all the
remember that.
technology, all the smart people, and guess what? Their race to market with Encarta failed. Why? Because Wikipedia had an interesting sharing economy
Collaboration.
technology that invited everybody to contribute. Now, again, just like the internet, Wikipedia had a set of rules that people followed. And so, despite differences of opinion, Wikipedia is profoundly cooperative and fair and honest. And so you never know where the paradigm shift's going to come from, and small and medium-sized businesses interested in the quality of life can be early adopters of what we're introducing.
You know, you introduced some interesting memories there in Carta. I had not heard that in a really long time. But actually, one of the early ones that used to be paper was Britannica. So I used to have that, right? And then, you know, you can then go into their, because Encarta was website, but Britannica was CD driven. So you used to have to put in the
Well, it was
CD, and
paper
then
originally, yeah.
it was a paper originally, but then it was the CD that you know, whenever you wanted to use the encyclopedia, you had to put in the CD and it will pop up the application and you will consult the CD to get the, you know, to do your research. It's incredible because you talk about this and now you go back, it's like, oh my God, you know, I didn't even think of that. But, you know, we're talking AI and you go back and you mention Encarta and Britannica, and I'm thinking here, it's like, oh my, like, the shift, right? Like from the time where you needed the books, and you'd remember they used to cover like walls. I don't know, you know, maybe you and I remember it, but in my house we had two encyclopedias, and they covered. There was a whole bookshelf because they were so big, and you had to go and look by the letter, and then consult, and then grab the
And
next
now
one.
you can't keep them up to date, but anything electronic can automatically be kept up to date. Always add the
I
newest thing.
know. And yeah, exactly. So if you, I remember, you know, back then, if you wanted to update your encyclopedia, you would get the extra, the extra books every year. The app there, which will have, you know, they were super huge, but they would update the encyclopedia per se. And
And
then
you
we
wouldn't
moved
know
on to the
whether to look in
CDs
the old one or to look
and
in the
the
new
new
one.
one. And then we got to the CDs. So every year they would come up with a new CD that which you had to buy to get the newer information. And then it transferred over to just being web browser based, but you had to log in and they would keep it updated, and then you would have the information at you know, more accessible. But now we go and we look at it, and now not only you have all of that, but you have the AIs, which I'm thinking about something I actually watched earlier today with some of the new updates coming out from, you know, Perplexity and ChatGPT. And one of these new updates, it's like the thing is doing your research, and it's not just doing your research, but it's giving you like basically building the whole report thing with graphs, with right. So now, we used to like. So if we look at it now in the context of this conversation, you go books, CDs, internet, AI. It's like when it was the books, it used to take so much time, right? To write a paper of any kind, you had to do all the research, by hand, and you had to go to the libraries, and you had to, use your index cards and all that stuff. And then we did CDs, and now you just had to access a computer and have a CD access. That shortened the time in which you could produce the content. And then we did internet, it was even shorter. Now it's AI, and it's even shorter. But where
Uh,
has all that extra time gone?
well,
And
longer working hours. It's crazy, but I wanna build on what you're saying because there's a couple of things going on. AI can't think outside the existing paradigm. And so we've had to train our AI to understand. When I first described shorter working hours, higher quality of life, less
hmm
damage to the environment, business led, market based, profit driven, AI couldn't help but think I was being a leftist. And I said, I had to train it over and over to stop referring to the problems of capitalism and start thinking about the power of capitalism to implement next generational innovation. All right, so that's thing number one is AI needs training to be better than the current economy or better than the current technology. And all of our readers should look up two paradigm shift gurus. Why did I say all of our readers? All of our listeners or watchers. The paradigm shift concept came from Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. But then a generation later, a gentleman named Joel Barker, who was our first investor 30 years ago, he was a futurist. He became the paradigm shift guru who said, no, it applies to all fields. Thomas Kuhn thought it only applied to hard sciences, but he was wrong because paradigm blindness, which means you can't imagine what's next, applies to everything in society. We're stuck in old ways of thinking about gender, of thinking about race, of thinking about transportation. It's not just hard sciences, sustainability. There's the traditional way of thinking, which often holds us in place, keeps us stuck. Then there's the outside the box thinking that paradigm shifters or innovators or youth in particular bring. So the other thing is there's a lot of pushback against AI, like, well, young people aren't going to learn to do research because they just put the topic in and they get all the information. They should sit around reading books. Well, that's like saying young people shouldn't have learned calculators and should have been doing long math in school. That got discredited. And the same with why would someone have to do, unless you're doing original research, which we do because the new paradigm's not accessible through just the old research. But why should people have to do things the long, slow way when there's new tools? You could become a genius writer by training your AI to your, writing nuances, and there's different AIs for different things. So there's Claude for writing, and there's, Chat GPT for less conversational things, and on and on. You would do a much better job of describing all the different AIs. I'm just
it's a
trying
good
to
point. And
teach
on
Chat
that note,
GPT to stop
we
thinking like a
we
leftist.
yeah, we do Claude for writing, Chat GPT for quick answers, researching technology support. So anything that, when we're doing development, it's really good for that. And then I personally prefer Perplexity for research. So I love Perplexity. Especially these newer updates, because that the answers are so much more complete, right? It's not just the blog that is writing, it's the referencing that is doing. And honestly, I'm using Perplexity probably more than Google at this point.
Okay,
Yeah.
you've won me over. How much does it cost?
It's free to use. If you want, like, all the benefits is $20, so it's the same as ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'd like to say, God, I had a topic I wanted to put on the I want to talk, since we're inventors and innovators and bringing new vision and new product to market. I want to say a little bit about what today is called lean startup, which is
Okay.
minimum viable product and early adopters. So I'll use
Yep.
the metaphor first of the internet. The internet didn't start at all as the internet. It was the Department of Defense, the National Science Foundation, and universities all over the world just working on telecommunication. You know, what if our system got bombed? How could we survive it? So they were inventing a secure and protected international telecommunication system. So that was the minimum viable product. And if you had gone out and started describing everything that the internet was going to bring to us, people would have laughed, right? Well, you got a magic box over here and a magic box over here, and invisible rays go from this magic box and take television and news and
All of it.
research. You know, it just would have sounded ridiculous. And yet that it started with minimum viable product and everything was built on it. But it also started with early adopters. You see, the average person on the street didn't own a computer, so how would they have participated? So the early adopters were students and techies. And the early adopters scaled it by saying, wow, this is interesting. We can play with this, but can we do bulletin boards and chat rooms and eventually websites and eventually e-commerce? And so the early adopters have a critical role. And of course, students started stuff that grew up to be Facebook and grew up to be Google and, and these were all just little innovations at first. And so everything I'm talking about will have little expressions at first, shorter working hours. People will wake up and say, oh, I have this extra income coming in. I don't want to just stay at work all the time. I want to go spend more time with my family.
Right.
There's so much money going into mental health these days. You know, one of the biggest chats out there on the internet is there's the one, what's your purpose? You know, people hardly have time for a purpose. They're so busy working. But there's another one that, how can I lead a healthy, balanced life? And more importantly, maybe, how can I role model for my children a healthy, balanced life? And
It's hard.
well, it's ridiculously hard because technology, instead of shortening working hours, is speeding up the pace at which people chase money. And so again, our paradigm is so outside the box.
Well,
but
it's
it
also making,
starts
I think, as much as I love technology, I think technology, it's also made our standard of living so much more expensive. So,
expensive and also stressful. You know,
yes.
trying to keep up with the pace of technology versus the old-fashioned inherited neighborliness and taking breaks at work and all this stuff that seems impossible in the computer age. So we're bringing back the value of healthy, balanced lifestyles, which means that's going to have an impact on mental health, which is going to have an impact. You know, I did my mental health journey way early in my life, so I'm not at all affected by other people's belief that an inventor should sleep under their desk and spend 20 hours a week in the office. You know, I mean, 20 hours a
I
day in
always
the
say,
office.
hey, you know what? I always said, we can date ourselves here, but back in when we were younger, hey, we didn't have all this stuff, and hey, we made it. So, and I think for the most part we fared fairly all right. So
Well, I have a few.
I don't
I
know.
have a few years on you. This thing that's mostly salt and not very much pepper. Yeah, I'm 73. I'll be 74 in September. It's just crazy. My workaholic nervous breakdown that led to transcendental meditation, that led to a healthy, balanced lifestyle, but a lot of outside the box thinking. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi used to talk about politics and economics in harmony with all the laws of nature. I mean, technology shouldn't be running the show. Technology should be the servant. And we've been going in the wrong direction. I've been looking at a lot of science fiction on Netflix lately, and it's all violence and it's all, it lacks the human element. It's got pretend romance, I would call it. So we go down. And in the old days, it was the unions fighting management for the 40-hour work week, and some people still think that's the model. But unfortunately, the union sort of got pushed aside and the shorter work week sort of disappeared, and that we allow that to divide us, that the left wants shorter hours, the right wants more productivity or something like that. But it's ridiculous because people everywhere, even the billionaires are suffering. Believe me, their mental health isn't necessarily the model. And there's
I
so
believe
much
you.
worry about, who's going to sneak up on me and take my idea, or let's fight the evil left or let's fight the evil right. And it's all nonsense, because rise together by sharing the work, sharing the leisure, and not taking our needs out on the environment, but live and let live with all of nature. These are all simple formulas if economics wasn't money centered, if it was people and planet centered. So I have a co-author who's a professor of human centered design, and we've written a couple of book chapters. You can look them up on InTech Open. It's a digital mass producer of books, but it's Joel Hodroff and Tom Fisher on this new economics, how it's people and planet centered rather than money centered. The Bible again has plenty of examples of money as a false idol. Whether it's gold money or whether it's coins, money was a false idol in those days, and love was the answer that Jesus brought. And every religious offering on the planet tries to get people to think more about their fellow human beings, their relationships, their family, their quality of life, their community, helping the poor and the needy, not being violent to one another. And everybody takes their religion to one day a week or something like that, and is under the subject of the business world the other 6 days a week. It's sort of a craziness. So spirituality is an important part of balancing work life and what's often called work-life balance.
All right, let me ask you one last question that I think, for all of us is important here. What is one practical first step that you can take today to shift from the scarcity mindset to abundance mindset, using digital tools, community partnerships, all the stuff we've been talking about?
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways, if you don't mind. First of all, just wake up. Look at the digital economy. Everything digital is infinite. Again, scarce resources and unlimited wants and needs is so absurd. There's more food than can be eaten if we allow it to be grown and distributed. And, every flat roof in every city could have a permaculture greenhouse, no transportation, no pollution, and healthy organic food right in every community, right? We got the flat roofs of government buildings, of schools, of businesses, of big box retailers. I mean, it's ridiculous. So we live such a primitive life in terms of longer working hours, more stress, parents hardly seeing their children. All right. So waking up, everything digital, there's more books than you can read. There's more restaurants than you can eat in. There's more entertainment opportunities. Even if you were watching sports on the television, on the radio, and on the internet, we are drowning in everything, and we're wishing we could carve out a little more time for sports, for fitness, for health. I'm a big walker, and I hold my meetings walking with colleagues, especially new meetings. I say, let's walk around a lake. Let's not sit in a coffee shop. So looking at the quality of life and looking at the reality of abundance. But what's not abundant is the money to distribute the abundant goods and services. So I'm going to give one. You might have to edit this out. I don't know how long you're going to give us in the end. But in 2008, the global economy crashed. But let me tell you, for the United States alone, they said $5 trillion in wealth disappeared. That is the most absurd comment ever made in the history of economics, because not one thing disappeared. Not one product or service disappeared off the shelves. Not one bit of housing, one factory, not one bit of electricity, not one bit of human skill, knowledge, or creativity, not one bit of renewable resources. Nothing disappeared. What happened is valuations fell, which is numbers in computers. That's pure confusion between money and economics and goods and services. So it was all just a product, and they make excuses. but they blame the rich. No, they blame the too many poor people were given mortgages. I mean, it's just absurd. You don't need blame if you actually have answers. You just get down to work on solving the problem. So in 2008, $5 trillion of wealth that caused millions of people to lose their homes and their life savings had nothing to do with our ability to produce and distribute goods and services. It's just bad economics. All right. So that's why we say an economic paradigm shift will solve all of this. So what could people start to do every day? They could look at the abundance. They could look at their priorities. What would they rather be doing than long hours away from their children? Now, I'm not saying everybody can't love their job and can't spend all their time at work, but everybody I know feels a little overworked, a little underpaid, and like way too little family time or travel time or whatever. So just think of all the things we would do as a society, cultural things, educational things, travel, global service work. The Peace Corps getting by on an eyedropper today. The funding in the United States, the funding for the senior volunteer corps called AmeriCorps, got yanked. And so it's all, in my opinion, bad economics. We don't need to threaten the rich. We don't need to blame the poor. We don't need to have bad relations with China or Russia and Ukraine or Gaza and Israel. It's all just a product of this crazy world of not loving one another and thinking money's the object and not, but there's things to feel better about. We haven't dropped an atomic bomb on anybody since 1945. Maybe we are getting more civilized. I mean, there's plenty to be discouraged about, but the fact that the sharing economy took the tiniest bit of excess capacity, an empty room in someone's home or an idle car and driver, created millions of jobs, billions of dollars of new wealth. When that's done on a win-win basis, when every time we add new technology and new kinds of work and new kinds of amenities, when that raises everybody up instead of some win and others lose, because we never lose the ability, I'll say it one more way, because every time we should be standing on the shoulders of the old way. When we went from the agricultural economy to the industrial economy, the first thing that happened was people lost their jobs on the land. They didn't have the skills for the new economy. And it took decades for the industrial economy to show that everybody could rise a little, everybody could prosper more. But it was always leaving plenty of people behind, and it was always filtered through win-lose competition over money. So now we've gone from the industrial economy to the high-tech economy. Have we solved poverty? No. Hunger? No. Education for everybody? No. And so this isn't an attack on capitalism or on the rich. It's just an explanation that money-centered economics and commerce and culture and all that is holding us back. If we had humanity-centered, and this was the other thing I was going to give as an example. This came under the category of minimum viable product and early adopters. And we talked about this once, but I'm going to remind you what scaled everything from the hippie food cooperatives and Earth Day to the mainstream, because it wasn't the growth of the cooperatives. They invented bulk, organic, recycling, carpooling, complementary and alternative, herbal. That all came out of the food co-ops. And the hippie tree huggers of Earth Day raised the issues, but they weren't the ones who created a mainstream environmental movement. Well, it happens that it was called Concerts for the Environment. It started in Minnesota with Kenny Loggins, Dave Matthews Band, and U2, but it scaled by young people in the 70s to Live Aid, Farm Aid, Band Aid, Hands Across America. And today it's called Global Citizen. And they're doing concerts all over the world, but they're still charity concerts. So I didn't spend any time, maybe this will be the next time we talking about our community loyalty rewards and how a new money working as a ledger currency can raise everybody up together. We think some of the minimum viable product will be small and medium-sized businesses because, they want more customers and people in their communities want more purchasing power. So people earn community loyalty rewards not through spending. That's whoever has the most money now gets the most rewards, but through community volunteerism, youth academic performance. Stay-at-home moms are performing value for the community and for society. all kinds of things. There's paid fire departments and volunteer fire departments. Well, what if we can pay for all these things communities need in community loyalty rewards? It's just taking excess capacity and not rewarding spending, but rewarding everything else that lifts up families and communities. So Concerts for the Environment, the next round, led by an international, a global group called Global Citizen. Imagine Taylor Swift throws a concert and the only way to get in is with your community loyalty rewards. Young people will be looking all over the place, and seniors, for where, and it can be anybody. It can be Rihanna, it can be Beyonce, it can, and I've started a conversation with the Timberwolves and the Lynx. That's the Minnesota basketball teams, men's and women's. They've got a stadium that's empty more than it's full. So they can sell their extra seats for some community loyalty rewards, but they can also, on off days for the stadium, doesn't cost you anything to put more people in those seats, and then you get to sell refreshments. So imagine Concerts for the New Economy. So that was quick, but that's an example of a minimum viable product and early adopters. And that's what people can do, is watch for these opportunities and get in touch with us and ask how to help. And look at CauseCard. Look up CauseCard and see what it would be like to join that small town friendly program.
All right, Joel. Well, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. It was a pleasure having you here and, discussing a new way of doing businesses, business, a new way of thinking about it anyways.
A new way of thinking about business and society, not just narrowly business. What do we want to produce for our communities? What type of quality of life?
Yes. Anyways, thank you again. Thank you for being here, for spending the hour with us, for sharing your knowledge and your ideas for the future. We look forward to maybe having you back again in the future, see how these initiatives are going and how you're
we can do this again, and I hope people come to you to learn more, and you're going to give out our information for those who need it.
Definitely, yes.
Well, thank you, Carolina. It was good to have a background meeting, and then it's been fun to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you, Joel. We'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.